Hi, everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to today's Cathedra webinar. We're coming to you live on June 12th. For any NLC webinar first-timers here today who don't know, our Cathedra webinars get their name from the Creek word for learning. Today, you're going to be learning about internet accessibility in Indian country from Marie Bonville. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center. We're also thrilled you could join us for today's webinar. If you could follow along as I read the disclaimer aloud, please. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. We also have our copyright infringement law pictured here. Just a friendly reminder that the materials today are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. All right, before we get going, I want to familiarize you with the environment here on Adobe Connect and let you know how you can interact during today's webinar. So if you look at the top of your screen, you'll see an icon of a hand with a plus sign. If you click on that icon, you could raise your hand, agree, disagree, show applause, show laughter, or even signal requests like asking the instructor to speak louder or to slow down, please. Now your screen should look similar to this graphic here. To the bottom left, you'll see a pod that says Files. Here you'll find a copy of today's slides, as well as several handouts and appendix items that are there for helpful resources for you to have. To download a copy for yourself, just hover over the item you want to download with your mouse, and then click the arrow pointing downwards to download and save it onto your device. Second box to the right, labeled web links, is where you'll find our survey about today's webinar, along with the link to receive our weekly newsletter, connect with the Native Learning Center on LinkedIn, and any other links that can be seen throughout today's presentation. Finally, all the way over to the right, we have the chat box available. This is how you'll communicate with both the instructor as well as the NLC staff. If you have any questions during the presentation, we welcome you to send those in by using the chat box. Just type your message into the space that says type here and hit enter or click the up arrow icon button to submit. We do encourage class participation, so feel free to write in your questions. Feel free to write in your comments. If you're having any tech support issues, you could also submit that to the chat box, but know most of them can be solved by just exiting and then re-entering the meeting room. But let's all try out the chat box together. If you can go ahead and type in your name, where you're joining us from, your tribal affiliation, and your work or your role in Indian country. And while you guys are doing that, it is with great pleasure that I introduce today's webinar instructor, Marie Bonville. And Marie, I'm going to hand it off to you now.
Awesome. Thank you, Brooke W. I want to thank you for being here today. It looks like I've got Jessica and Philistine in the room. As other folks file in, we just hope you enjoy an opportunity to talk about internet accessibility and our role in housing. It was amazing to me how similar some of our struggles are when it comes to development and infrastructure and all of the ways in which we have work to do. So I thought, what better way than to have a conversation as to what it looks like for our partners in increasing Indian country internet service. And so awesome. Thank you for being here. A little bit about me. I started with the Seminole Tribe of Florida way back when, 2000s. And I worked in their education department, primarily focused on workforce development. And then soon I left for the Native Learning Center in 2013. So I've been with the tribe for a very long time, working in different capacities, but the need for home ownership in all Native communities is kind of where my heart is. So now I get to work with different organizations like the South Dakota Native Homeownership Coalition to continue to build our housing practitioner capacity, whether that's through training, technical assistance, and other things, needs assessment surveys, things like that. So that's a little bit about me. Today, we're going to talk about the ecosystem as it relates to tribal broadband development. What does it look like? And what are the challenges that our other practitioners face, right? We'll highlight the Tribal Resource Center. I'm so very thankful to have them on today to talk about how they help to improve internet accessibility and affordability, which is, I know it's a housing term, we use it all the time, but in their world, it's also very important, and why I think there's such good synergy, such a good connection that we can have with them moving forward. We'll talk about about the challenges to enhancing broadband infrastructure. We'll talk about that affordability number again. And then we're also going to talk about how essential internet accessibility is to future funding opportunities. So the bridge, right, between education, healthcare, economic growth, even cultural preservation. All of these efforts hinge on our ability to access the internet in our communities. And of course, it's homeownership month, so I can't stop talk about homeownership without talking about June and how awesome it is that this month we get to celebrate our practitioners. So I thank you all. We don't always get to stop and smell the roses. We have lots of work to do in Indian housing, but I do want to say thank you to you all for all that you do in your communities. And I hope that we're taking this month as an opportunity to educate individuals on, what's going on in your community, what's going on in your market, how they can maybe energize a different topic, a new topic. Right now, energy is a big one. A lot of our homeowners or those interested in homeownership want to know about how to be energy efficient. And so, maybe that can energize your department, your program to put out information this month, since it is National Homeownership Month. And I would say just one more thing about homeownership month. We always talk about in homeownership utilities, access to utilities. And when we talk about them in an essential way. We talk about them because water is essential, right, to the hookup process. Electricity or some other energy source is essential to the home. And so I love the fact that we're going to start to talk about, hopefully, internet accessibility in terms of it being an essential resource in our communities as well. So here's a poll for you to get you involved. Are you familiar with the FCC and tribal broadband development at all, right? Or maybe even upgrades, because with your NAHASDA dollars, you are allowed to use funding for upgrades in that regard. So we've got a no and a somewhat. So hopefully everybody can see the answer there. I know that the Tribal Resource Center is kind of looking at that as well. And so we'll try to tailor today's talk to answer any questions you all might have. And of course, if we don't know, we'll find out together and we'll try to get you that information. So I do appreciate you participating in the poll. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't know a whole lot about it either prior to this, to doing the research and talking with the Tribal Resource Center. But sovereign nation, sovereign networks, right? So similar to affordable housing challenges, folks are facing the same insufficient infrastructure and inadequate broadband resources as well. And that means that, we are also facing this similar challenges. Internet accessibility as a human right is something that we're striving towards. So I thought that this graphic was important to place when you look at the numbers. So just to kind of give us all a little bit of a background on it, the FCC data report that while over 99% of housing units in U.S. urban areas have access to broadband, only 65% of housing units on tribal lands have the same level of access. Download speeds are 75% lower, internet costs 11% higher. Right? So in 2020, more than 18% of people living on tribal lands had no access to broadband technology. Remember where we were in 2020 and the start of the pandemic. And so you can imagine that this digital divide was really impacting so much at the time and continues to do so today. So compared with about 4% of people living in non-tribal areas, we have so much work to do. And yes, funding did come in to support these efforts, but it's long overdue and there's still much more work to be done. The GAO also found that the FCC Commission data overstated broadband internet access in tribal lands, making it, and that's not news to us either in regards to being underserved and unreported, right? So making it difficult for additional funding and support because the information was incorrect. According to the ASU's American Indian Policy Institute, many residents on tribal lands are still relying heavily on smartphones to access the internet, while many are accessing it through public Wi-Fi or a friend or relative's house. So I know many of you already know that and experience that in your communities, but it's just as far as the data is concerned, we're still building out what it's currently like, what the Wi-Fi code is, right? What is going on when it comes to internet accessibility. So here's another graphic. This one brought to us by the Building Indigenous Future Zones case studies of 2021. And so again, looking at it from a graphic perspective, all tribal lands being at the U.S. urban areas located at the very top in that 96 to 98 percentile. And then you've got U.S. rural areas, which also have work to be done, right? A lot of that's geographical in terms of, the middle mile, which we'll talk about the infrastructure itself. But then you look at all tribal lands and you see that that there's still a gap, an even deeper gap in internet accessibility deployment. So, this is where there are opportunities for feasibility studies, telehealth, distance learning, affordability, digital inclusion initiatives to help bridge the digital divide. But the ecosystem is complicated. There are over 20 federal agencies at last count, tribal, state, and local governments, hundreds of tribal and non-tribal internet service providers, library and cultural centers, community development financial institutions, banks, advocacy groups, and so many others that are involved in this process that it can be very burdensome on the tribe, and why they don't always we don't always see a whole lot of conversations on this. I don't think, partly because it's just so cumbersome. But I do want to highlight Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe as for not only becoming the first tribal-owned telecommunications company, but also for recently receiving and leveraging $17 million grant by the USDA Rural Development to serve Cheyenne River and Standing Rock with fiber broadband upgrades, right? So they are really at the forefront of not only serving their community but also, becoming an internet service provider also has its benefit in terms of economic development, right? So another example of this is San Diego County. There are 17 tribal reservations in San Diego County. Approximately 2,700 of those tribal homes are on reservation, but not unserved rural communities of over 2,500 in the adjacent non-tribal communities, right? So meaning there's not only the tribal communities that aren't being served, but the non-tribal, which is their market that could be an economic opportunity there for the tribe as well. And they're unserved in broadband internet access, unserved in affordable choices to access adequate broadband speeds. So, not to get too technical, because again, I'm no expert, but just to kind of give you an idea of what we mean when we say terrestrial broadband, they don't have fixed terrestrial broadband, which is a high-speed data transmission to homes, businesses. It means it's permanent, stationary use, and it includes fiber, cable, DSL, and fixed wireless technologies, right? So, for example, in San Diego County, the terrain is mountainous, rocky, and rural. And so that means that there are no terrestrial broadband services available to 15 of those reservations. So out of the 17, there are no terrestrial broadband services for 15 of them. So understanding that, here's another graphic. Some folks are, wordy like me, and other folks need graphics. So I just wanted to put it out there for you to see what this looks like, on a map. So from 2013 to 2019, or might even be 2020, inching towards 2020, you can see the disparity. So thankfully, the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association has a program called Tribal Digital Village, and they help to bring internet services to key community buildings and programs, essential services, right? Think emergency and fire rescue, think our schools and our Head Start programs, right? So they support key community operations on the reservation. And they've created over 350 miles of point-to-point or point-to-multi-point links supporting 86 tribal buildings. So that includes tribal administration. Well, as we're having this conversation about tribal sovereignty and network sovereignty, spectrum sovereignty, as we're going to talk about here in a little bit, just to put that in perspective, this is also hard to do when you don't have access to reliable internet services. So kind of taking a step back and looking at all of these different agencies involved: Department of Agriculture, Department of Commerce, Department of Education, Interior, of course, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Federal Communications Commission, the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences, or Services, excuse me. I didn't know that when I first started the research. White House Office on Science and Technology Policy, and many, many, many others. Um, the report that came out from the Department of Interior's Office of Indian Energy and Economic Development is that there are 7 fundamental barriers to broadband deployment. So and of course, I really like the fact that we're all just calling it what it is, which is red tape. I figured it'd be good for us to look at those 7 barriers, in that it's lack of coordination amongst the agencies, and then also between the tribal governments and the state and local governments, which we all know we would much rather those fundings come directly to us as opposed to through the state. But insufficient data, as I mentioned before, the FCC, their maps continue to be incorrect in regards to the service areas. Missing building blocks regarding capacity building, or opportunities for the tribes to get involved in the conversation, and establish the technical assistance necessary for larger infrastructure projects. Insufficient funding, as we all know, is pretty much prevalent in all of our services we're trying to provide. Complex permitting, also not unknown to our housing folks. This can include the easements for utilities and other essential services that are needed in order to put in this sort of infrastructure. Low adoption, going back to the red tape, the capacity building, what it takes for the tribes to get involved, and then weak connection to economic development, not bridging that gap, or understanding the way in which it would be economically viable for a tribe to go down the road of maybe becoming an internet service provider. So I'll leave you with those. Definitely, I have provided links, which I didn't mention before, but at the very bottom, many of the programs or any sort of reports that we reference are also going to be located in the files area for you to download, along with a copy of the presentation. So the FCC's Native Nations Communication Task Force identified 2 main barriers to improving broadband access in Indian country. The first, of course, is that terrestrial, lack of middle mile infrastructure I talked about earlier, which would connect major regional and national internet networks to local networks. But then there's this discussion about spectrum, the range of radio waves for communication. Spectrum is usually allocated as an expensive auction, right? It's run by the FCC, and it makes it hard for tribes to afford it. As of 2020, only 18 of the 573 recognized tribes had spectrum or held spectrum licensing. So improving spectrum access has been, a conversation, and spectrum sovereignty even more so. In 2019, the FCC created the Tribal Priority Window, allowing both tribes, Alaska Native villages, Hawaiian homelands to apply for 2.5 gigahertz of spectrum licensing. By early 2022, 328 licenses had been granted, showing the need and interest for Indian country to be a part of the conversation and own indigenous networks. So let's talk a little bit about spectrum sovereignty. This is, again, something I wasn't aware of as a housing practitioner, but essentially it argues that Native nations have the right to access and use the spectrum above their lands. They shouldn't have to go through the FCC for it. So while spectrum sovereignty is an umbrella term used to talk about policy proposals, it rests in the idea that it's a natural resource. Spectrum is a natural resource like water, coal, sunlight, and should be governed similarly by the tribes. So I was able to watch a really great video, and I included it here for you all, in which activist Dara Blackwater, a citizen of Navajo Nation, argued about spectrum sovereignty, and she really discussed the topic in depth. So I encourage you all to check that out. But essentially, her argument was that tribes shouldn't have to apply for or pay for the licensing for spectrum over their lands, that Native Nation licensed their spectrum and should earn the revenue, not the federal government, from that spectrum. So her analogy is the sunlight, right? In which she argues one of the most useful analogies to utilize is the sunlight, in that essentially what the FCC is doing by taking and selling indigenous spectrum is as if they put a solar panel. So think about a solar panel as big as the Navajo Nation over the Navajo Nation, and then used all that power and sold it to the city of Los Angeles, right? So if that took place and they kept the money, then the Navajo Nation wouldn't be able to grow crops, wouldn't never see the sun, the people would never feel the sunshine on their skin because there would be solar panel over it, right? Now, not only are they not getting the sunlight for themselves or their land, they are also not getting any of the money that is coming from the resource of the sunlight. And again, this is Dara Blackwater, a citizen of Navajo Nation. So, the idea and the struggle isn't anything new in Indian country in regards to resource rights, and the confirmation of indigenous sovereignty and what it means for us to be able to um, govern self-determination and govern our resources as we need in our communities and for our communities. But on the flip side, as we navigate both trying to discuss spectrum sovereignty through legislation, I think there was a legislation that made it that didn't actually make it into law, but the fact that it was proposed is a good thing. And we're also navigating it through this regulatory system, right? So here you can see that as of April 23rd, 2024, when I pulled this information from the FCC, here are some of the pending applications. So tribes are definitely going at it from the two different angles, in which hopefully we can legislate um, uh, the discussion, and we can turn it into legislation to where we can have spectrum sovereignty. However, in the meantime, they're utilizing the FCC guidelines and the regulatory opportunities and options to get us somewhere. So moving into how we share best practices, I'm just going to highlight a few, and then of course we're going to bring on the Tribal Resource Center to talk more about what they're doing to help share resources. We need a more supportive policy agenda on all the different levels to create, build, and manage indigenous networks, right? So the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe, as I mentioned before, not only the first tribally owned telecom, but also established a telecommunications commission. So much like the FCC, they can regulate telecom services within the reservation boundaries. So that's huge as a capacity flex, and then also to show that the idea of self-governance. This is exactly what this looks like. And then St. Regis Mohawk Tribe bisected the U.S.-Canada border. I can only imagine what that looked like, and is working across national jurisdictions to deliver broadband services to their communities. That is huge. Nez Perce Tribe has built their service area network and middle mile fiber from Spalding, Idaho to Clarkston, Washington. So that's a huge service area where they can then lease service to other providers, right? So that economic arm I've been talking about. And then most crucially, these providers all work together, sharing resources, best practices, both with their regional groups and then also the national groups, with a vision to benefit and uplift all Indigenous people. So this just gives you a better idea of the sorts of information. Again, me not being really aware of what was going on in regards to the digital divide, I'm so thankful for the Tribal Resource Center, which much of this information came from, where they could talk about and explain. So at this point, I have the pleasure of bringing on Brooke Monroe, who is going to talk more about the Tribal Resource Center.
Thank you, Marie. That was very informative. You touched on a lot of really great information there. I wonder if maybe we should stop and see if there's any questions so far. Okay, looks like there are.
Okay, cool.
Well, I'm Brooke Monroe, and I'm the director of the Tribal Resource Center. What we do is we provide hundreds of free resources to tribes who are looking to start, grow, or maintain their own internet service provider companies on reservations. Like I said, there are hundreds of resources there, such as videos, tutorials, checklists, all kinds of resources that are very, very helpful. Yeah, sorry. Sorry, I think my headphones died for a second there. Yeah, so we also have a help desk. So if you need any specific information, you can reach out via the help desk and we can connect you with a broadband professional and they'll be able to work with you through the problems you have. We also have a TRC community, which is a platform where reservations can connect with each other, or tribal communities can connect with each other and share the information they have, share the processes they're going through, and even celebrate some of the wins that they have. And then we also have the send a note function. So if you do need a specific resource, you can reach out to us and we'll be happy to locate or create that resource for you as you're going through some of the challenges that involve broadband access.
I think I used the send a note option for sure. Talk a little bit about, just for folks that aren't familiar with your work in the Tribal Resource Center, what is it like in that? Oh, and we do have an actual question in regards to the TRC. Is it available to state tribes or just federal tribes? That's a great question. Thank you,
The
Linda.
information and resources are open source. So, I mean, anyone can technically go to our website and use the resources on there, but they are geared towards tribes and they are accredited with tribes. We work with several tribes across the nation, and we kind of have a pool or a hub of resources that we all found useful. And we also work with tribes, excuse me, to kind of see what the questions are, what the hardships are, what the red tapes are, and we work all together and figure out what solutions are and what are the best resources to break through those challenges.
So on the conversation of development, I know that I was just thinking about, in our world in housing, we have a lot of workforce development challenges in relations to the certainly the building of our communities, their homes, tribal buildings, et cetera, but then also to wanting to build our network of inspectors and appraisers and those additional costs that are out there in housing that we can cut down on if we had local providers, right, service providers. So could you talk a little bit about development in your world, what it looks like, both through infrastructure and also workforce development?
Absolutely. Infrastructure wise, I think there are a lot of similarities with, developing houses or even renovating the housing available on reservations. There's, kind of like a 12-step process there. And I think the first several are, like your assessment and the planning and the infrastructure and the partnerships, things that you are probably already doing when it comes to developing housing. But there are also things that can tie in with that. For example, when you're doing your assessment, you obviously know your community's needs, but you also can recognize the current infrastructure you have. So when you're building these houses or renovating the houses for the community, you can also do that and include broadband. For example, if there is a local water tower near the development that you're working on, that would be a great place to put some fixed wireless. If you can access that, it's pretty much essentially just pointing the technology towards your development. So working with those already existing assets and working with partnerships, say with like the utility department, being able to lay fiber while you're also putting in the water to your homes, it would save both time and money and help you develop a lot smoother. And there's funding that could be shared, so it helps make the project more sustainable. And then next you would have your planning stages, which is very similar to housing development. You know, you have to have your strategic plans and your goals and your budgets and your timeline and project management, which I feel like you guys are very familiar with. Building the actual infrastructure and developing it is also very similar, especially with workforce involved. A lot of the necessary experience, such as, you know, digging the lines and placing the lines, they're very transferable and translatable. So a lot of the skills that you need to actually develop and build the infrastructure, you already have. And while if you don't have that experience, the technology you will buy will also provide a lot of training. So it's very important to put that kind of in your grants as saying, we're buying this equipment from X corporation, but also we are including the training to actually work on and maintain this equipment. So you want to include that in part of your contract with your vendors, that's saying, hey, yeah, we want to use your equipment, but you need to teach us how to take care of this equipment. That'll make sustainability a lot easier as well. It's saying, yes, we have your equipment. Yes, we locally know how to maintain and develop and grow and work with it. And also, I think partnerships are very important. You want to kind of work with your tribal communities and work with the probably like the utilities companies and stuff like that. That way you already have a leg up in the industry, because these utility companies, they know how to do billing, they know how to do the customer service, they know how to ticket when there are issues going on. So if you can partner with those companies and partner with the tribe, that'll also help develop it a lot smoother and a lot easier. Funding we can discuss a little bit farther on, I think. I think the challenges are really going to be building that workforce. There are a lot of great options when it comes to building that workforce. And like I said, your construction crews and your people already probably have most of this information. But there is a great program through the Fiber Broadband Association. It's called Train the Trainer. And what you do is you go out there and they pretty much give you all the information you need, and they give you certification so that you can go home, go back to your tribal community, and you'll be able to train others. So then you can work on that development, that workforce development, at the same time as learning and growing and developing your own ISP. And then that in turn will help, you know, build your workforce. I will add that to the web link here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That sounds like a great connection to make, right? To be able to say, while we're in the process of program design, let's go ahead and find additional funding or resources to assist or offset the cost of training and get our folks some fiber.
Exactly.
How did you?
And on that
Yeah.
funding. Okay, wait, hold on. I got two things. One, if you want to shoot me an email for that Fiber Broadband Association training, they do offer tribal discounts, so I'll be able to connect you to that.
Oh,
I think
awesome.
my email's on there. And let's get back to the poll we initially did. So within the last couple of months, the FBA or the FCC increased what it is to be acceptable broadband. It used to be 25 megabits download speeds to 3 upload speeds. Now they quadrupled it. It's 100 megabits download to 200 megabits download. So with the properties that are already on the reservations, chances are they're not meeting that expectation, which means those properties are now underserved, which opens the gates towards funding to those properties. So you can definitely go back and say like, hey, we have to renovate this property and upgrade its necessary fiber
Wow, that's
development.
fascinating. Thank you for that. I think that's going to be a really good connection for when we have a conversation here in a little bit about grant writing. For sure, that demonstrating need, that is going to be a huge element to demonstrating the need for the additional funding in your because there is eligibility. It is an eligible activity to upgrade your fiber, especially for your affordable housing units. So we will get there for sure. Next, real quick, I want to talk about sustainability and what that looks like for your industry. And when you mean, like, what exactly do you mean when you say sustainable? For us, it's usually like the materials that we're using, or it could be the funding itself, like wanting to make sure that our tribal projects and the maintenance, for example, has a sustainable viability, to discuss. So, what does it look like for your industry?
That's exactly it. We want to make sure that the funding is there definitely to start these projects, but we want to make sure that we have the funding and the capability to continue the projects. We also do talk about, the technology. We want to make sure it's taken care of. The only issue there is obviously, I feel like everyone's noticed that the technology changes constantly when it comes to broadband. I feel like, even with cell phones, it's every year something new, something bigger, something greater. And we want to prepare our tribal communities for success. We want them to be able to sustain this necessary utility. And some of the easiest ways to do that, in Indian country, is to make sure your ISP is efficient. Make sure that the management and the network can run smoothly the way it needs to, and also kind of be a little bit future proof if possible. A lot of that comes from working with partners such as your tribal offices and your utilities. Also with the workforce, it is not always financially feasible to bring in outside help into these tribal communities. So it's imperative that we build the workforce to be able to sustain, the networks, because it'll save time and money if we can get our own communities involved into their community connectivity. And it does also include, energy efficiency. So, the cell phone towers and the Wi-Fi towers that you see, we can add the solar equipment. We can add wind equipment to that to make sure it's not costing us unnecessary dollars at the end of the day. And it's also optimizing the infrastructure that we already have. Like I use the example of laying fiber, and when you're laying utilities, or if there's road work going on in your community, that's a perfect opportunity to lay fiber and to run these lines, and kind of save money, but also get these assets being the most lucrative as possible. And also sustainability includes digital literacy. I don't think a lot of people understand the need to know how to actually use the internet in our communities. Yeah, it's great if you build it, and if you have it, it will be used. But we need to also teach our communities the most lucrative ways to use it. Let's help our communities, build their education. Let's help our communities grow their economy. Let's help them actually use the internet efficiently. So then that in turn can, encourage long-term use and help support these ISPs and connectivity projects.
I appreciate the conversation of how to keep it future proof. I think that that's something that we can connect with. I think as we try to look at our sustainability efforts and being more cost effective with our projects, because the cost of construction and building is just so much more expensive. Between materials and labor, we're already leveraging our resources to the max. And so this is just one of those areas where I think that we need to also, in housing, start to look at other ways to collaborate, to do both, to be more sustainable and future proof, as you said. So the next question that we have is in regards to affordability. I don't even know where to start, because affordability is such a big mountain to climb, but I'll just let you talk about it from your perspective. I think everyone in the room knows, just say the word inflation and we know our NAHASDA dollars on us as far as we need to go. So
absolutely. And especially with these housing units and things that you're using, they're usually for people who don't have a lot of lucrative expendable income. But there are programs that are available. I'll put a link in the post. But there are links that will help your tenants and help the people who are the residents be able to actually afford the cost of the internet. Should be in there now. So there are programs that go hand in hand. So if they're living in affordable units, or if they are on SNAP, or even if they're veterans, there are a couple resources they can use to actually be able to afford it. One of which is called Lifeline. There are income restrictions, but most reservations kind of meet the standard of the income restrictions. And in the link, there's a table chart that will help break down what the income restrictions are. But most people, if they're on Social Security or they have public housing assistance or veterans, they can definitely qualify for that. Then there's also the Connect Home USA, and that is a public-private partnership between the U.S. Department of Housing and the HUD, Urban Development, as well as a few other organizations. And its goal is to narrow down the digital divide, especially with families that have school-age children and they're on HUD assistant housing. It is a great way to help afford connectivity. And then there are always state and local resources. A lot of states provide assistance when it comes to affordability. And then also on that link, there is a fairly decent list of nonprofit organizations that will also help connect families who need assistance with affordability.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the resources. I'm going to have the NLC kind of check back, and if there are links that you don't see in the chat area, then we'll go ahead and get them to you in a little bit. Like, I'll make sure that we can just put those in the chat towards the end there. I don't personally see them, but I've got like a million screens open. Perfect. Thank you. Now, to kind of switch gears, we're just going to really quick talk about, like, for example, if your organization was interested in learning more about some of those grants, what they would look like. We just wanted to highlight the fact that the Native Learning Center does have many grant writing resources. Typically, when we're talking about housing, we're talking about the Office of Native American Programs and, our IHBG grants, our CDBG grants, if folks are interested in applying to that. Of course, there's Title VI, and then Connect Home, as Brooke M mentioned. But I just wanted to highlight or connect the dots as it relates to our NAHASDA dollars and opportunities to fund future broadband development, right? So let's look at eligible activities. So, under development of or acquisition of new housing, there is an area that says include the infrastructure during the construction process, right? So that is your ability to support broadband efforts. Also, rehabilitation or modernization of affordable housing. You can connect to a fiber network or network wiring in units. Infrastructure to support new housing, of course, that includes installation of fiber or network cable in development of site and installation of permanent dishes to develop point-to-point system in development. So as Brooke mentioned before, that water tower that's already there and pointing that to your development, pointing it back to that affordable housing development, it would be like the perfect or classic example there. But as we already know, when you're applying for a grant, people are under pressure, processes are under pressure, and of course your technology is under pressure too. So these are the kinds of things that require some capacity building, technical assistance. If you can access that as an opportunity to learn from other tribes that have already gone down this road, we encourage you to do that. The Native Learning Center has, of course, these sorts of webinars are available 24/7 on the website, but then there are more intensive trainings that are available. We'll talk about the Tribal Broadband Bootcamp as an option here to get you more information. But, when we talk about grant writing at the Native Learning Center, we always talk about, initiating multiple partnerships, collaborating with different entities to build your capacity within your organization so your grant application is stronger. And of course, having a joint mission statement does that for you. Of course, when you can get strategic partners to demonstrate capacity, then you can get letters of support. And then, of course, you have a better chance of demonstrating measurable need, right? So when you work with the education department and how many households are currently, like, for example, a lot of times we get money for needs assessments. Well, do our needs assessments address or discuss broadband needs either? That could be one of those options. So measurable need, certainly you want to be able to demonstrate not just outcome, but impact. And you can't do that without asking the right questions. And then, of course, the unique role that each partner plays. I already talked about the ecosystem and how many unique roles there may well be. So, coordination and project management is going to be essential. So again, we talk about relationship building. We talk about developing good relationship with potential funders, because now, especially after the pandemic, you've got both private and public partners. I don't know, in housing, there's the duty to serve that many banks have, but and Brooke, maybe you can answer this question, but are private telecommunication entities obligated to provide any sort of support to tribes for capacity or to build relationships? Like, are you seeing that in your environment? I know that with us, we have what's called duty to serve, where banks have a requirement to assist in bridging the gap for homeownership in underserved communities, or that have been left out of the homeownership building of wealth over the years.
Unfortunately, no. A lot of these private big companies don't think that it is marketable enough to serve these communities, our communities. There's just not enough money for them, and they just don't care. So unfortunately, the digital divide is our burden, and these big name companies aren't interested in helping. With that said, though, a lot of these communities have opportunities to kind of take advantage of that. For example, if a company, such as like AT&T or T-Mobile or whatever, is coming through your community because they have to connect from one point to another point. If there is a situation where they have to lay fiber through your tribal communities, you need to jump on that situation and say, you cannot access our land without providing, X amount of fiber for our community use. You will not own it. This is ours. This is the only way that we're allowing you access to cross through our land. So that's kind of the only way where you can take advantage of those situations. Otherwise, they're just going to neglect tribal communities.
It's frustrating, but I know it's something we're not used to, in regards to the lack of support, compassion to see the community develop in a way that's developing a good relationship with the tribes, that are essential to their economic viability in the future. You know what I mean? I think about, maybe not now, we don't have the access that we need, but that in the future, our communities will have. We see all the economic development happening, in housing and other areas, community development. I do feel like at some point they'll regret it for sure. But I asked, because, we do think that, having that conversation, if there's conversations on their website regarding community impact or opportunities to get additional potential funders involved, then it's worth, trying to have that conversation. Connecting with past recipients, attending webinars, events, seeking out direct contact info. As you all are in the room, there's 5 of you in the room right now that definitely should, get each other's information, stay connected with each other, and learn about the different research projects that have been awarded. I mean, typically what I do is always work backwards and say, okay, who was awarded what? What did their project design look like? What was their scope of work? And, sometimes folks are very willing to share that information with you. And then again, as we talked about earlier, sustainable workforce capacity, right? So what does that look like? Well, there's something called the Tribal Broadband Boot Camp, and I'll let Brooke talk a little bit about that. Maybe Brooke will hold that one for the end, since we've got a little bit of time. If you want to talk about the FCC's grant writing guidelines a little, and what that looks like.
Okay, so the FCC writing guidelines, they're pretty direct, and I'm sure that most of you have grant writing experience, when it comes to the housing development. Luckily for, those who are just now starting the process, they have streamlined it a bit better. There are actually portals that kind of link everything together, and they're in the process of making these 20 plus different offices have one specific office, so hopefully it'll run a lot smoother. But they're the same as writing any other grant. You want to make sure you're paying attention to the eligibility requirements. They're usually very straightforward, very specific. But you just definitely want to keep an eye on that. The application process can be very frustrating. I have heard from many tribes that often they will change the criteria at the last minute, and they'll give you like 72 hours to have to update your applications and documents and everything. That I would just, be advised to definitely keep an eye on that and keep a close look at it. The project description is very important. You definitely want to be clear and concise with your project. Definitely include your goals and objectives and the population and outcomes. And if possible, if the eligibility requirements allow it, include training and include the admin work as well. A lot of the times that's not included, and it leaves tribes kind of scrambling for how are we actually going to maintain this, on the admin side. Your budget and funding, you definitely need to go very, very detailed. If it's not exactly outlined the way that you need it, there's not much wiggle room that is allowed there. make sure you're including all expenses and all other costs. And while you're doing that, definitely keep in mind that there is a backstock issue. A lot of communities are trying to build these ISPs right now. So there's a large backstock situation. And a lot of these grants are specifying that you have to buy American products. So you definitely want to keep that situation in the forefront of your mind.
So, in regards to the evaluation criteria, is there anything that we should look at or look for regarding? I mean, I see the project feasibility, impact, sustainability, all things we talked about earlier, really. But any other goals you think that are unique to success when it comes to these projects?
Yeah, I would definitely try to include that workforce training,
Mm-hmm.
and definitely try to include, when you're working with the vendors to get your actual product, include that they should do mandatory training involved, like incorporated with the equipment that they're giving. Um, Definitely, try to get the technology and the equipment that it's cost effective, but also kind of future proof. Like I said, technology changes
Mm-hmm.
constantly, and we aren't necessarily building this for us. We're building it for several generations. There are communities that are still using the equipment from you know 50 years ago that's still applicable for today. So that's kind of what we're trying to do, is we're trying to prepare and elevate our communities for the future generations.
On the reporting and compliance, I just wanted to add that one conversation I had with funders was regarding sustainability by way of project managers and leaders. Turnover is high in general, but then also too with the pandemic, we saw an influx of retirements. So I would just say that from a sustainability project perspective, that if you're talking about reporting and compliance, talk about how you're going to build in some sort of succession planning so that you
Mhm.
have that as well. Funders are wanting to see that you have a plan if someone were to get replaced. Some of these projects are multi-year, correct? If I'm not, I mean, from what
Mhm.
it looks like, if it takes this long to get a license from the FCC, I can imagine how long the actual project takes to build in that infrastructure or build out the broadband development.
Absolutely.
Cool. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit about Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program. It's in its second round of funding, and it's available to Native American, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian lands for the deployment of internet infrastructure, affordability, um, let's see, affordability, telehealth, and distance learning initiatives. And so the link is there in the chat. Also, there's funding for feasibility studies. And so through the National Tribal Broadband Grant Program. And I wanted to highlight, so if you look at the feasibility study of the Lower Rural Reservation, it assesses the risks, rewards, and roadmap for creation of telecommunications as an enterprise to serve the reservation in South Dakota. And so the cool thing is you can just go to the map and you can look up the different or the current awardees and also the amounts and what they're doing with their project. And it talks about their project information as well. So I thought this was a great resource to kind of give you ideas, kind of if you're still in the planning stages, this can be a great roadmap for you to connect. Speaking of connect, we've got USDA Rural Development's Reconnect program, and this is funding to facilitate broadband development in underserved rural areas. As this instant, it is a indigenous digital divide issue, but as you saw in the graphics, rural America has a very similar issue right? In the sense that, we're all trying to bring these services to our communities. There is some conversation that needs to be had on the local state level regarding infrastructure and bringing infrastructure to the communities. And that will ultimately mean through the tribes as well that are in rural areas. So definitely check out USDA.gov and the Reconnect program. Eligible funding purposes, of course, you can use it for construction or improvement of facilities, to fund reasonable pre-application expenses, and to fund the acquisition of existing systems that do not currently provide sufficient access to broadband. So going back to what Brooke said before, that would be most of us. So again, Tribal Resource Center has all of this information as well. So I want to bring that up, as well as just a little video that shows how to access all the resources on their website. So that luckily the NLC has uploaded it for us, so you can take a look at that as well.
If anyone's talking, y'all are muted.
Oh, thank you, Brooke. I didn't realize I was. I just wanted to highlight some of the actual video topics. Hopefully, once you get there, you'll see there's from. But for example, the conversation on business models. There are different tribes working with and in conjunction with other internet service providers. So just to kind of see how different business models look in different communities, it's a neat video to take hold of and watch. And also building your partner, stakeholders, talking to tribal leadership, etc. Feasibility, there's a resource for that. And then now the Tribal Broadband Boot Camp, which I'll let Brooke M talk about a little bit as well.
Great, thanks. So the Tribal Broadband Boot Camp is usually about a week long, and they're hosted on tribal lands nationally. You can find the information on tribalbroadbandbootcamp.org. So what they do is they give you hands-on experience and training when it comes to broadband. So they'll teach you different tricks of the trade and different ways to implement broadband in your communities. Usually there are kind of like broadband tours where they take you to the local ISPs and they kind of give you the tour and the rundown and all the information you need there. And they're actually a really great place to get to know other tribal communities that are going through the same experiences and challenges when it comes to broadband. Like I said, they're hosted on different tribal lands nationally, so it helps foster this kind of relationship, and definitely will come away from it with an incredible amount of knowledge and some great connections.
What are some of the, topics that we find at the boot camp?
Sure. So the topics usually range from, like the equipment that you'll need, the training that you'll need how to actually, connect. It's called splicing, how to connect the fiber and then splice it to take it directly to the home. You actually get hands-on training, and you will physically be able to try the splicing. It talks about connecting to the FCC licensing and how to get that throughout your community. It goes through grant processes, available grants. There are so many amazing, great topics that they cover. It really is a boot camp. Like, you will get so much information.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate that little synopsis. And for those interested, definitely check out their website. We also wanted to talk about some of the videos that I showed earlier and where to find them. So the National Digital Inclusion Alliance is another one of those nonprofits that have been working with Indian country, because this is a issue that is an Indian country, but also exists in rural America as well. So to have those sorts of partnerships is essential, so the voice can get louder in regards to the needs and the funding. It's been helpful. And so this video, for example, Indigenous Digital Sovereignty, was really informative. Dr. Tracy Morris, who is the executive director of the American Indian Policy Institute, spoke about the digital divide, and talked about like the background, the history of, and as well as where it's headed, since there's so much more funding now for it after the pandemic. So definitely wanted to have and provide that as an opportunity. So that link is there as well. And then in regards to case studies, you don't have to look very far. If you go to this link here below, Building Indigenous Future Zones for Tribal Broadband Case Studies, it highlights Coeur d'Alene Tribe's Red Spectrum Communications, Ho Nation's Starlink communications efforts, Nez Perce Tribe, their Department of Technology Services, and then Fond du Lac's fiber services. So I think they also, St. Regis Mohawk, yes. So definitely take an opportunity to learn more about their what they've worked on to build their capacity, and see if there's anything that is similar in your communities that you can start to demonstrate. I would connect with their housing authorities and find out what, or if they've had any success in building a relationship to support those efforts as well. So I know we've like inundated you with tons of links and resources, but I just wanted to remind you that some of them are located in the presentation itself, and there's a copy of the presentation in the files box there. The American Indian Policy Institute has tons of resources. The National Tribal Broadband Grant, the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program, the National Association of Tribal Telecommunications Associations. This one was very interesting to me. I didn't know much about them before this webinar. And then the Tribal Broadband Bootcamp, as I mentioned before. So those are the additional resources. We've got a few more minutes. If anyone has any questions, feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat area. For me, this was one of those things where I just felt like June is the month for homeownership. And it's also a month where I like to explore different ways in which, as practitioners, we can learn more about things. And so I do appreciate having Brooke on to talk about, from the Tribal Resource Center, talk about such a fascinating and relatable industry. And I really do wish and hope that in the future that housing can be much more a part of the conversation. So Brooke, we do want to say thank you from both myself and the Native Learning Center for participating today.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me.
And we'll hold on. If there are any questions in the chat, we'll go ahead and respond. But I will toss it over to the NLC if there are no other questions. And I'll respond. I can respond in the chat area to any that pop up, in the middle of all of that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Marie and Brooke, for this amazing conversation. I'm going to go ahead and start going through the outro, folks, but feel free to type your questions into the chat. Marie and Brooke are still here. I hope you can take a moment to complete our webinar feedback survey. I'm going to go ahead and launch that for everybody. It just takes a minute or two to complete, and that helps us know what's working really well, what we can maybe improve upon in the future. And it is completely anonymous, so feel free to be as candid as you would like. We hope you can join us for our next webinar. That's actually going to be tomorrow on June 13th. This one is going to be the second installment in the Strategies for Navigating Change with Your Tribal Department Staff series. So the recording for part 1 is up on our website if you missed that, and then part 2 is going to happen tomorrow at 2 p.m. Registration is free as always. Feel free to access this and any other recorded webinars online on our website, nativelearningcenter.com. There's a Cathedral Webinars tab with a recorded webinar section. You can click on any one of the webinars that we've done for the past 2 years. Feel free to view those. You can share them with your colleagues, share them with your friends. Please also check out our upcoming events posted to our various social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. We also have an in-house podcast titled the Hope a Thing, a Native American Podcast, where we discuss more focused topics within Native American housing and self-determination. You can listen to that on Simplecast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, as well as viewing the video recordings with our guests on YouTube. All right, folks, it doesn't look like any other questions are coming in the chat. So once again, thank you so much to our presenters, Marie and Brooke. Thank you again to all of our participants for joining us today. I hope everybody has a fantastic rest of the day, and we hope to connect with you all again real soon. I'm going to go ahead and close out the webinar, folks. Everybody have a great rest of your day.